The heat of August 1966 sat on Harlem like a heavy, wet wool blanket that had been soaked in boiling water. It was an oppressive, physical weight that pressed down on the rooftops of the tenements, trapping the exhaust fumes, the smell of frying onions, the stench of uncollected garbage, and the simmering, dangerous rage of a city on the edge of a nervous breakdown. It was 8 p.m., but the sun hadn't fully set. It hung low over the Hudson River, a bruised, angry orange orb that painted the sky in streaks of violet and blood red. The air was thick enough to chew. It was the kind of weather that made people crazy, the kind of heat that turned petty arguments into knife fights and made the police sweat through their uniforms before they even stepped out of their cruisers. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat on the terrace of his penthouse apartment at the Lenox Terrace, the highest point in his kingdom. He was wearing a silk robe over his pajamas, nursing a glass of iced tea that had long since gone watery. He was 60 years old, and tonight he felt every single minute of it. His heart, the engine that had powered him through 40 years of gang wars, prison riots, and federal indictments, was betraying him. It fluttered in his chest like a trapped bird, beating against the cage of his ribs with a frantic, irregular rhythm. The doctors called it congestive heart failure. They gave him pills. They told him to rest. They told him to avoid stress. Bumpy smiled grimly at the thought. Telling Bumpy Johnson to avoid stress was like telling a shark to avoid water. It was the medium in which he lived. He looked out over the skyline of Harlem. From up here, the city looked peaceful. The lights were just starting to flicker on, creating a constellation of yellow windows against the deepening purple of the twilight. He could hear the distant sounds of the street, the honking of horns, the wail of a siren, the rhythmic thumping of a bass line from a passing car. It was the music of his life. But tonight, the music felt off-key. The sliding glass door behind him opened. Bumpy didn't turn around. He knew the footsteps, heavy, hesitant, burdened. "You're breathing hard, Junebug," Bumpy said softly, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the wind. "Bad news walks heavy." Junebug stepped onto the balcony. He was Bumpy's right hand, his shadow, a man who had stood back to back with him in knife fights in the 1930s. But tonight, Junebug looked terrified. He was sweating, his hat crumpled in his massive hands, his eyes wide and darting. "It's Elisha, boss," Junebug whispered. The name hit Bumpy harder than a bullet. Elisha, his daughter. His heart gave a violent kick, skipping a beat, sending a jolt of pain down his left arm. Bumpy turned his chair slowly. The business face, the mask of the king of Harlem, was gone. In its place was the raw, terrified face of a father. "Where is she?" Bumpy asked. The words were quiet, but they carried a vibration of violence that made Junebug flinch. She didn't come home from the library," Junebug stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "We went looking. I had the boys scour the blocks. We found her friend, Sarah. Sarah was crying, Bumpy. She was hysterical." "Get to the point, Bug," Bumpy snapped. "Sarah said they met some guys," Junebug said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Down near the river. White boys. Bikers. They call themselves the Iron Skulls. They're a new club, just moved into a derelict garage off the West Side Highway. Real trash, Bumpy. Grease, leather, Confederate flags sewn onto their jackets. They charmed her. You know Elisha. She sees the best in everyone. She thinks the world is like her poetry books." Bumpy stood up. The The chair scraped violently against the concrete floor, a screeching sound that echoed in the silence. "Where are they now?" "Sarah said Alicia wanted to leave an hour ago," Junebug said, his voice cracking. "But they wouldn't let her. She said they surrounded her. She said they were laughing, Bumpy. They were dragging her into the garage, and they were laughing." Bumpy walked past Junebug into the living room. The air conditioning inside was cool, a stark contrast to the furnace outside, but Bumpy didn't feel it. He felt a coldness radiating from his own marrow. Mamie was standing by the kitchen island. She was wearing a housecoat, her hair wrapped for the night. She had heard everything. Her hands were covering her mouth, her eyes filled with a terror that only a mother knows. "Bumpy," Mamie whispered. "Oh God, Elisha." Bumpy didn't stop moving. He walked with a singular, terrifying purpose toward the master bedroom. "Call the police, Ellsworth," Mamie pleaded, rushing to follow him. She grabbed his arm. "Please, if you go down there, it's suicide. You're not a young man anymore. Your heart—" Bumpy stopped. He looked at his wife. He loved her more than he loved his own life. He had built this empire, this fortress, to keep her safe. But right now, looking at her was like looking through a window into a burning house. "The police," Bumpy said. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was dead. "The police will take a report, Mamie. They will ask her what she was wearing. They will ask her why she was talking to white boys. They will fill out paperwork while those animals do whatever they want to our daughter." He pulled his arm gently from her grip. "I am not calling the police," Bumpy said. "I am going to get my daughter." He walked into the walk-in closet. It was lined with suits, rows of Italian silk, wool, and linen, color coordinated and perfectly pressed. He ignored them. He went to the back, behind the winter coats, to a hidden panel in the wall. He pressed a latch, and the panel clicked open. Inside was a small arsenal, a shotgun, 2.45 caliber pistols, a box of ammunition. Mamie stood in the doorway, watching him. "Take the guns, Bumpy. Take Junebug. Take the crew. Don't go alone." Bumpy looked at the pistols. He reached for one, his hand hovering over the cold steel. Then he stopped. "If I take a crew," Bumpy said, mostly to himself, "it becomes a gang war. The police swarm the place. Shootout. Elisha gets caught in the crossfire. If I go alone, they won't expect it. They'll think I'm just a stupid, scared old man coming to beg." He withdrew his hand from the guns. Instead, he reached deeper into the recess of the safe. He pulled out a long, slender object wrapped in black silk. Mamie gasped. "Bumpy, no!" It was a katana, a Japanese longsword. It had been a gift from a triad boss in Chinatown 15 years ago, a man who respected the old codes of honor. It was a masterpiece of steel, folded 1,000 times, sharp enough to cut a falling silk scarf in midair. Bumpy had never used it in a fight. It was a relic, a symbol. But tonight, symbols were powerful things. "Guns are for business, Mamie," Bumpy said, turning to face her. The silk-wrapped bundle felt heavy and balanced in his hands. "Guns are impersonal. You pull a trigger, and it's over. These men, they touched my daughter. They laughed at her." His eyes were dark holes in the universe. "This isn't business," Bumpy whispered. "This is punishment." He walked out of the closet. He grabbed a gray suit jacket from the rack, one of his finest. He put it on over his pajamas. He didn't have time to change. He put on his dress shoes, slipping them over his bare feet. He walked back into the living room. Junebug was standing by the door, holding a revolver. "I'm ready, boss," Junebug said. "Let's roll." "No," Bumpy said. Junebug blinked. "What?" "You stay here," Bumpy commanded. The tone was not up for debate. "You guard this door. You sit in this chair, and you watch Mamie. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or Elisha, you put them down." "Bumpy, I can't let you." "Stay!" Bumpy roared. The sudden volume made both Mamie and Junebug flinch. Bumpy clutched his chest for a second, wincing as his heart protested the outburst. He took a shallow breath, forcing the pain down. "I need to know she is safe," Bumpy said, his voice softer now. "I need to know my rear guard is secure. Can you do that for me, Bug?" Junebug looked at the old man. He saw the sweat on Bumpy's upper lip. He saw the tremor in his hands. But he also saw the fire. The old fire. "Yes, boss," Junebug whispered. "I got the door." Bumpy nodded. He turned to Mamie. He kissed her on the forehead. His lips were cold. "I'll be back for dinner," he lied. He walked out of the apartment, the sword tucked under his arm like a rolled-up umbrella. The elevator ride down to the garage took forever. The hum of the machinery sounded like a funeral dirge. Bumpy leaned against the mirrored wall, closing his eyes, counting his heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, flutter 4. "Hold on," he told his heart. "Just give me an hour. You can stop tomorrow. Just give me tonight." He got into his Cadillac Eldorado. The black paint shone under the fluorescent lights of the parking garage. He placed the sword on the passenger seat. He turned the key. The V8 engine roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that echoed off the concrete walls. Bumpy drove. He drove fast, but with surgical precision. He cut through the side streets of Harlem, heading west. He passed the corner boys, the dope fiends, the jazz clubs, the churches. He saw the world he had built, and the world that was slowly crumbling around him. He crossed 125th Street, heading toward the river. The landscape changed. The brownstones in apartment buildings gave way to industrial decay. Warehouses with broken windows, empty lots filled with rubble and rusted cars. The smell of the Hudson River, brackish, salty, and rotten, filled the car. He found the place Junebug had described. It was an old radiator repair shop, a squat brick building isolated at the end of a dead-end street near the West Side Highway. It looked like a bunker. The windows were painted black. A single yellow light bulb burned above the steel door, surrounded by a halo of moths. Parked out front were 7 motorcycles. They were choppers. Big, ugly, loud machines, chrome and grease. Bumpy pulled the Cadillac up across the street, killing the headlights but leaving the engine running. He sat there for a moment, watching. He could hear the music thumping through the brick walls. Rolling stones, painted black. He unwrapped the black silk from the sword. The scabbard was black lacquer, gleaming in the dashboard lights. The hilt was wrapped in rough shark skin for grip. The tsuba, the handguard, was iron, shaped like a dragon. Bumpy took a deep breath. He popped a small nitroglycerin pill from a bottle in his pocket and placed it under his tongue. The sharp, peppery taste filled his mouth. He waited for the blood vessels to open, for the pressure in his chest to ease slightly. He opened the car door. The heat hit him instantly, smelling of gasoline and low tide. He walked across the street. He didn't run. Kings don't run. He walked with the measured, rolling gait of a man who owns the pavement beneath his feet. He reached the steel door. It was slightly ajar. He could hear voices inside, loud, raucous laughter. "Did you see her face? Little girl thought she was going to walk out of here. Bumpy's hand tightened on the sword. He didn't kick the door down. He pushed it open with his left hand, stepping into the lion's den. The garage was cavernous and dimly lit. The air was a toxic soup of cigarette smoke, exhaust fumes, stale beer, and unwashed bodies. In the center of the room, under a pool of light from hanging shop lamps, were the bikers. There were 7 of them. They were exactly as Junebug had described, only uglier. Big men, thick with muscle and fat, wearing denim vests covered in patches, skulls, lightning bolts, iron crosses. They looked like Vikings who had traded their long ships for Harleys. They were lounging on crates and an old, ripped sofa, drinking beer from cans. And in the back, huddled in the corner near a stack of tires, was Elisha. She looked terrified. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her hair was messy. She was hugging her knees, pressing herself into the wall as if trying to disappear. A man was standing over her. He was the leader. Bumpy knew it instantly. He was tall, lean, and wiry, with a long blonde beard and a red bandana tied around his head. He was holding a beer in one hand and was leaning down, shouting something in Elisha's ear. Bumpy stepped fully into the light. The nearest biker, a massive man with a gut that spilled over his belt buckle, looked up. He saw the black man in the gray suit and pajamas. He saw the gray hair. "Hey!" the fat man shouted, spitting beer. "We're closed, Grandpa. Get lost." The music stopped. Someone had unplugged the jukebox. The room went silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and Elisha's soft sobbing. The leader, let's call him Riker, stood up. He turned slowly. He looked at Bumpy. He looked at the suit. He looked at the sword in Bumpy's right hand, which was currently held down at his side, the scabbard touching the floor. Riker smiled. It was a predator's smile, a smile of wolfish delight. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Riker said. His voice was scratchy, like sandpaper on stone. "You lost, boy? The nursing home is 10 blocks east." Bumpy ignored him. His eyes locked onto Elisha. "Elisha," Bumpy said. His voice was calm, steady, and low. Elisha's head snapped up. Her eyes found him. For a second, she looked confused, as if she was hallucinating. Then, recognition flooded her face. "Daddy?" she choked out. The bikers erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Daddy," Riker mocked, clutching his chest in fake sympathy. "Oh, ain't that sweet, boys? The princess called for her daddy." Riker walked toward Bumpy. He swaggered. He had a hunting knife on his belt, big and serrated, but he didn't reach for it. He saw an old man. He saw a victim. "You made a mistake coming here, Pops," Riker sneered, stopping 10 feet away. "This is Iron Skull's territory. We don't like your kind in here." "I am taking my daughter," Bumpy said. The laughter grew louder. The fat man stood up, cracking his knuckles. Another biker, this one bald, with a spiderweb tattoo on his face, hopped off a crate and picked up a heavy length of chain. "You ain't taking nothing," Riker hissed. "We're just getting to know Elisha. She likes us. Don't you, sugar?" Riker turned his back on Bumpy to look at Elisha. It was the ultimate insult. To turn your back on an enemy is to say you are not a threat. "I suggest you turn around and walk out," Riker said over his shoulder. "And maybe, if you're polite, we'll let her come home tomorrow, after we've educated her." Bumpy closed his eyes. He inhaled deeply. He could smell the cheap beer on Riker's breath from here. He could smell the fear radiating off his daughter. "God, forgive me for what I am about to do. But I am not doing it for me. I will give you one chance," Bumpy said. The room went quiet again. The bikers looked at each other, grinning. They couldn't believe the audacity. "One chance?" Riker laughed, turning back around. "Or what? You gonna hit me with your cane? You gonna have a heart attack on my floor?" "Step aside," Bumpy whispered. "Let her walk to me." And we leave. Riker stepped closer. He was 5 feet away now. He looked Bumpy up and down with disgust. "No deal, old man," Riker spat. "Here's what happens. We beat you until you can't stand. Then we make you watch while we have some fun with..." Click. The sound was small. It was the sound of Bumpy's thumb pushing the tsuba, releasing the blade from the scabbard. In the fraction of a second that followed, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air pressure seemed to drop. Bumpy moved. He didn't move like an old man. He moved like a memory of violence. He moved with the muscle memory of 1,000 street fights, fueled by a rage that burned hotter than the sun. He stepped forward with his left foot, his hips twisting. His right hand drew the sword in a blur of motion. Shing! The sound of the steel leaving the lacquer scabbard was a song, a high-pitched, deadly note that hung in the air. Riker didn't even see it coming. He was still smiling. He was still formulating his next insult. The blade flashed upward in a diagonal arc. It was a perfect cut, effortless. Riker's smile froze. His eyes went wide. A thin red line appeared on his neck, running from his left collarbone to his right ear. He tried to speak. He tried to raise his hand, but his body was no longer listening to his brain. A fountain of blood erupted from his neck. Riker dropped to his knees. He clutched his throat, making a wet, gurgling sound. He looked up at Bumpy, his eyes filled with sudden, absolute confusion. "How?" Bumpy didn't look at him. He flicked the sword to the side, a sharp snap of the wrist that sent a spray of blood painting the concrete floor. Riker fell face forward. He twitched once, and then lay still. The silence that followed was absolute. The 6 remaining bikers stared at the body of their leader. Then they stared at the old man in the gray suit. They stared at the sword, gleaming under the yellow light, dripping red. They couldn't process it. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. Bumpy Johnson stood tall. His back pain was gone. His heart pain was gone. He was in the zone now. The place where he had lived for 40 years. The place where empathy went to die. He looked at the fat man. "You laughed," Bumpy said softly. The fat man scrambled back, knocking over a stack of beer crates. Crash! Bottles shattered, foam mingling with the blood on the floor. "He killed Riker!" the bald biker screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Kill him! Kill the freak!" The spell broke. The garage exploded into chaos. The fat man grabbed a tire iron from a workbench. He roared, a sound of fear masking his anger, and charged. He was slow, clumsy, telegraphing his move from a mile away. Bumpy watched him come. He didn't retreat. He didn't flinch. He adjusted his grip on the sharkskin handle. 2 hands now. Power. The fat man swung the tire iron, aiming for Bumpy's head. It was a haymaker, a blow meant to crush a skull. Bumpy stepped inside the arc. He pivoted on his heel, his expensive leather dress shoes squeaking on the oily floor. He thrust. The point of the katana entered the fat man's stomach just below the rib cage. It went in smooth, sliding through fat and muscle. Bumpy twisted the blade and pulled it out in a single fluid motion. The fat man gasped. He dropped the tire iron. He looked down at his stomach, where a dark stain was spreading rapidly across his dirty t-shirt. He looked at Bumpy, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Bumpy shoved him aside with his shoulder. The man collapsed, curling into a ball. 2 down, 5 to go. Bumpy stepped over the body. He was breathing harder now, The exertion was taking its toll. His lungs burned, but he kept moving. He was a shark in the water, and there was blood in the water. "Get him!" the bald biker screamed, swinging the heavy chain over his head like a lasso. "Surround him!" The remaining 5 bikers fanned out. They were armed now. Chains, knives. One of them, a skinny kid with greasy hair, picked up a pool cue and snapped it over his knee to create a jagged spear. They circled Bumpy, but they were hesitant now. They had seen Riker die. They had seen the fat man gutted. They realized, too late, that they hadn't trapped an old man. They had trapped themselves in a cage with a tiger. "Elisha," Bumpy said, his eyes never leaving the circle of men. "Get down." Elisha threw herself flat on the floor behind the tires, covering her head with her hands, sobbing. Bumpy raised the sword. The blade was held high, in the Jodan no Kamae stance, the stance of fire, the stance of offense. He looked at the bald man with the chain. He looked at the spiderweb tattoo on his face. "You," Bumpy said. The bald man flinched. "You think this is a game?" Bumpy whispered. "You think you can come into my city? Take my blood?" The bald man screamed and swung the chain. The heavy steel links whistled through the air, aiming for Bumpy's legs. Bumpy jumped. It wasn't a high jump, but it was enough. The chain whipped under his feet, smashing into a workbench in a shower of sparks. Bumpy landed and lunged. The bald man tried to pull the chain back, but it was tangled. He looked up just in time to see the steel descending. The strike was brutal. The flat of the blade, Bumpy twisted it at the last second, perhaps out of mercy, perhaps to prolong the suffering, cracked against the man's temple with the sound of a pistol shot. The man dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the ground. 3 down. The 4 remaining bikers backed up. They were clustered near the back wall now, inadvertently blocking Bumpy's path to Elisha. They looked at each other. The bravado was gone. The racial slurs were gone. There was only the primal, animalistic fear of death. One of them, the skinny kid with the pool cue, was shaking so hard the wood rattled in his hands. "Who are you?" the kid screamed, tears streaming down his face. "What are you?" Bumpy took a step forward. He stepped into a pool of oil and blood. He stopped. He adjusted his grip. He stared at them with eyes that had seen Alcatraz, eyes that had seen the Great Depression, eyes that had seen the bottom of the human soul. "I am the consequences of your actions," Bumpy said. He pointed the tip of the bloodied sword at the kid. "You laughed," Bumpy said. "Why did you stop?" The biggest of the remaining 4, a giant called Tiny, who was holding a sledgehammer, let out a roar of desperation. He decided to rush. He didn't care about skill. He was banking on mass. Tiny charged, raising the sledgehammer. The ground shook with his steps. Bumpy waited. He stood perfectly still. He waited until he could smell the man's sweat. He waited until the hammer began its descent. Then, Bumpy Johnson moved. Tiny was a mountain of meat and bad intentions, moving with the momentum of a freight train that had lost its brakes. The sledgehammer in his hands wasn't just a tool, it was an asteroid on a stick, a rusted block of iron capable of turning a human skull into dust. He roared as he swung, a sound that was half human, half animal, filling the cramped, blood-smelling air of the garage with raw, unfiltered violence. Bumpy didn't try to block it. You don't block a freight train. You step off the tracks. He watched the hammer's arc. Time seemed to warp, slowing down into a thick, syrupy sludge. Bumpy could see the flakes of rust on the hammer's head. He could see the sweat flying off Tiny's beard in individual droplets, catching the yellow light like diamonds. He could feel the desperate, frantic flutter of his own heart against his ribs, a frantic warning that the engine was running too hot, that the boiler was about to burst. "Not yet," Bumpy told his heart. "Hold together. Just for 2 more minutes." As the hammer came down, smashing into the concrete floor where Bumpy had been standing a fraction of a second before, the impact sent a shockwave through the soles of Bumpy's Italian shoes. Dust and chips of concrete exploded into the air, creating a momentary fog of gray powder. Tiny grunted, the force of the miss jarring his shoulders, leaving him overextended, his chest exposed for a heartbeat. That was all the invitation the king of Harlem needed. Bumpy stepped in. He didn't swing the katana like a baseball bat. There wasn't room, and there wasn't time. He used the pommel. He drove the steel-wrapped handle of the sword into the bridge of Tiny's nose with the force of a hydraulic piston. There was a sickening, wet crunch of cartilage giving way. Tiny's head snapped back as if he'd been shot. He dropped the hammer, the iron clattering loudly against the floor. He stumbled backward, blinded by pain and the sudden rush of blood filling his eyes, his hands pawing at his ruined face. Bumpy didn't stop. Mercy was a luxury for men with healthy hearts. Bumpy spun the sword in his hand, reversing the grip so the blade faced backward. He dropped into a crouch and slashed across the back of Tiny's knees. It was a cruel, crippling blow. The razor-sharp steel severed the tendons that held the giant upright. Tiny collapsed like a demolished building, hitting the floor with a thud that shook the walls. He screamed, a high-pitched, keening sound that didn't match his size, clutching his useless legs, thrashing in the mixture of blue paint, motor oil, and red blood. "Stay down," Bumpy whispered. He stepped over the writhing giant. 3 left. They were backed against the far wall now, forming a jagged, terrified semicircle around Elisha. They had watched their leader die in a flash of silver. They had watched their strongest man crippled in seconds. They looked at the old man in the gray suit, this ghost from a different era, and they saw death walking. One of them, a wiry man with a twitching eye and a greasy ponytail, panicked. His survival instinct overrode his fear of the sword. He grabbed Elisha by the arm, digging his fingers into her bruised flesh. He yanked her up from the floor, pulling a serrated hunting knife from his belt. He pressed the blade against her throat. "Back off!" the man screamed, his voice cracking, spraying spittle. "Drop the sword or I cut her! I swear to God, old man, I'll open her up." The room froze. The only sounds were Tiny's whimpering on the floor and the ragged breathing of the men standing. Bumpy stopped. He was 15 feet away. He stood perfectly still, the katana held low at his side, the tip dripping onto the oil-stained floor. Elisha was sobbing, her eyes locked on her father. She looked so small in the grip of the biker. "Daddy, please." "Let her go," Bumpy said. His voice was no longer the boom of thunder. It was the quiet hiss of a burning fuse. It was the sound of a man calculating the distance between damnation and salvation. "Drop the sword!" the man shrieked, pressing the knife harder. A thin line of red appeared on Elisha's neck, a stark contrast to her dark skin. Bumpy saw the blood. Something inside him broke. It wasn't his resolve. It was the last tether holding him to humanity. It was the last piece of Ellsworth Johnson, the citizen. All that was left now was Bumpy. He looked at the man holding his daughter. He memorized his face. He memorized the fear in his eyes. He memorized the way his hand shook. "You have made a mistake," Bumpy said softly. "You think you are holding a hostage. You are holding a death sentence." "I said drop it!" the man yelled, hysteria creeping into his tone. Bumpy slowly lowered the sword. He bent his knees, placing the katana gently on the concrete. He stood up, showing his empty hands. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, opening his arms wide. "There," Bumpy said. "I am unarmed. Let her go. Take me instead." The man blinked. He hadn't expected the old man to comply. He licked his lips, his eyes darting to the sword on the floor, then back to Bumpy. The other two standing bikers, the skinny kid with the pool cue and a heavy-set man with a wrench, sensed the shift in momentum. They stepped forward, raising their weapons, emboldened now that the Reaper had put down his scythe. "Kick it away," the man with the knife ordered. "Kick it to me." Bumpy took a step toward the sword. "I said kick it!" Bumpy kicked. But he didn't kick the sword away. He kicked the tip of the scabbard that was lying near his foot, flipping it into the air. It was a distraction, a magician's trick. In the same motion, Bumpy dove. He didn't dive for the sword. He didn't dive for cover. He dove for the man's legs. It was a move from the street fights of 1930s Harlem, a move from the prison yards of Alcatraz where rules didn't exist. Bumpy hit the man's knees with his shoulder, tackling him with the force of a linebacker. The knife skittered away, slicing the air harmlessly as the man fell backward, releasing Elisha. Elisha scrambled away, crawling under a workbench, curling into a ball. Bumpy and the biker hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. Bumpy wasn't a young man. He felt his ribs groan under the impact. He felt the air leave his lungs in a painful whoosh. But he had the rage. He had the adrenaline of a father protecting his child. He punched the man in the throat. Once. Twice. Short, chopping blows meant to crush the windpipe. The man gagged, his eyes rolling back, his hands clawing at his neck. The other two bikers were on him instantly. A boot slammed into Bumpy's side. A wrench whipped across his back, tearing through the fine gray wool of his suit jacket and bruising the muscle underneath. Pain exploded in Bumpy's body. It was white-hot and blinding. He grunted, rolling to his side, trying to protect his head. "Get up!" he screamed at himself. "Get up or she dies!" He grabbed the ankle of the man kicking him and twisted. The biker yelled, losing his balance and crashing to the floor. Bumpy scrambled up. He was winded. His vision was swimming with black spots. His heart was hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against his ribs. Thump, thump, pause, thump. Like a drummer losing the beat. He was unarmed. The sword was 10 feet away. The two standing bikers circled him. They saw the blood on his face. They saw the sweat soaking his shirt. They saw the age in his eyes. "Get him!" one yelled. "He's tired. He's just an old man." They rushed him. Bumpy didn't retreat. He stepped into the pocket. He caught the wrist of the first attacker, the heavy-set man swinging the wrench. Bumpy used the man's own momentum, pivoting and driving his elbow into the man's solar plexus. The air rushed out of the biker's lungs. Bumpy followed with a chop to the side of the neck, dropping him to his knees. But the last man, the skinny kid with the pool cue, saw an opening. He lunged. Bumpy saw the jagged wood coming. He was too slow to dodge it completely. He twisted, and the sharp point of the broken cue slashed his left arm, cutting deep into the bicep, tearing through the silk of his shirt. Bumpy roared. It wasn't a roar of pain. It was a roar of annoyance. He grabbed the kid's shirt with his right hand. He pulled him close. He looked into the kid's terrified eyes. "You think this is a game?" Bumpy whispered, his face inches from the kid's. Bumpy headbutted him. The sound of bone on bone was sickening, like a dry branch snapping. The kid crumpled, dropping the pool cue, clutching his broken nose, blood streaming through his fingers. Bumpy stood in the center of the room. He was heaving for breath. Every inhalation felt like inhaling broken glass. He looked around the carnage. Riker was dead. The fat man was dead. Tiny was unconscious, bleeding out from his legs. The man who had held Elisha was gasping for air on the floor, clutching his throat. The heavy-set man was down. The kid was sobbing. Bumpy walked over to the sword. He picked it up. The weight of it felt familiar. It felt right. It felt like judgment. He walked back to the center of the room. The skinny kid with the broken nose looked up, terror etched into his bloodied face. He scrambled backward, pushing himself along the floor with his heels until his back hit a stack of tires. "Please," the kid begged, his voice high and thin. "Please, mister. I didn't do nothing. I just watched. Please don't kill me." Bumpy stood over him. He looked at the carnage he had wrought. He looked at his own ruined suit. He looked at the cut on his arm, dripping dark red blood onto the concrete. He raised the sword. The kid screamed, covering his face with his hands. Bumpy brought the sword down and stopped it an inch from the kid's neck. The wind from the blade ruffled the collar of the kid's denim vest. "Open your eyes," Bumpy commanded. The kid slowly lowered his hands, trembling so hard his teeth chattered audibly. "Look at them," Bumpy said, gesturing with the sword to the bodies of his friends. "Look at what happens when you touch what belongs to me." The kid looked. He gagged, vomiting bile onto the floor. "You are the one," Bumpy said. "What?" "You are the one who is left," Bumpy said. "I am leaving you alive. Do you know why?" The kid shook his head, tears streaming down his face, mixed with blood and snot. "Because the dead cannot tell stories," Bumpy said. "You are going to tell everyone. You are going to tell every biker, every hustler, every lowlife who thinks they can come into my city and take what they want. You tell them who came here tonight." Bumpy leaned in close, the sword tip resting gently against the kid's Adam's apple. "Who am I?" Bumpy asked. "But Bumpy," the kid whispered. "Bumpy Johnson." "Remember that," Bumpy said. "And if I ever see your face in Harlem again, I won't stop the blade." Bumpy pulled the sword back. He wiped the steel on the kid's vest, cleaning the blood from the metal with a slow, deliberate motion. He sheathed the sword with a sharp click. "Elisha," Bumpy said. She crawled out from under the workbench. She was shaking, her face pale, dust coating her skin. She looked at her father. She looked at the bodies. She looked at the blood on his arm. "Daddy, come here," Bumpy said gently. She ran to him. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her into his chest. She buried her face in his ruined suit, sobbing hysterically. "It's over," Bumpy whispered into her hair. "I got you. I got you." He walked her to the door. He didn't look back at the kid. He didn't look back at the carnage. He stepped out into the night air. The silence of the riverfront was shocking after the noise of the garage. The crickets were chirping. The water lapped against the pilings. The city lights twinkled across the Hudson, indifferent to the violence that had just occurred. Bumpy walked Elisha to the Cadillac. He opened the door for her. She slid in, curling into a ball on the leather seat. Bumpy walked to the driver's side. He paused, leaning against the car for a moment. The adrenaline was fading. And as it faded, the pain came rushing in like a tidal wave. His arm burned. His ribs screamed. But it was his heart that terrified him. It was fluttering wildly, a bird trying to escape a cage. His left arm, the one that had been cut, felt numb. But the numbness was spreading to his shoulder, to his jaw. Ischemia. He took a deep breath, forcing the air into his lungs. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small amber pill bottle. Nitroglycerin. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He managed to pop the cap and slide a tiny white pill under his tongue. He waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The fire in his chest subsided to a dull, throbbing ache. The constriction in his throat loosened just enough to breathe. He got in the car. "Daddy, your arm," Alicia whispered from the passenger seat. "It's just a scratch, baby," Bumpy lied. "Just a scratch." He started the engine. He didn't drive fast. He drove slowly, carefully, navigating the potholes of the West Side Highway. "I'm sorry," Alicia wept softly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Sarah said they were cool. I didn't know." "Hush now," Bumpy said, keeping his eyes on the road. "You have nothing to be sorry for. The world is full of wolves in sheep's clothing, Alicia. It is not the sheep's fault for being tricked. It is the shepherd's job to kill the wolves." They drove back uptown, crossing 125th Street. The familiar sights of Harlem greeted them. The Apollo marquee, the corner stores, the people sitting on stoops trying to catch a breeze. It was his kingdom, and tonight he had defended it with fire and steel. When they pulled up to the Lenox Terrace, Junebug was waiting in the lobby. He must have been pacing for an hour. When he saw the car, he ran out before Bumpy even put it in park. He saw the blood on the door handle. He saw Bumpy's face. "Boss!" Junebug yelled, opening the door. "Get her upstairs," Bumpy said, his voice weak. "Take her to Mamie." "What about you? We gotta get you to a doctor, Bumpy. That arm is bad. You look gray." "Upstairs," Bumpy commanded. "Now." Junebug helped Alicia out. She was still crying, clinging to Junebug's arm. "He saved me, Uncle June. He saved me." They went up in the elevator in silence. The hum of the lift felt deafening to Bumpy. He leaned against the back wall, closing his eyes. The floor felt like it was tilting. He felt lightheaded. He felt old. When the elevator doors opened, Mamie was standing in the hallway. She saw Elisha. She let out a cry that was half sob, half prayer, and ran to her daughter. They collided in a hug that seemed to fuse them together. Mamie rocked her back and forth, checking her face, her hands, kissing her forehead. Then Mamie looked up. She saw Bumpy. He was standing by the elevator doors, holding the sheathed sword. His suit was shredded. His shirt was soaked in blood, some his, mostly theirs. His face was the color of wet ash. Mamie didn't scream. She didn't faint. She was the wife of a king. She hardened. "Junebug," Mamie said sharply. "Take Elisha to her room. Draw a bath. Stay with her. Do not leave her side." "Yes, Mamie." Junebug led Elisha away gently. Mamie walked over to Bumpy. She reached out and took the sword from his hand. It was heavy, but she held it. She set it gently against the wall. Then she took his face in her hands. "Ellsworth," she whispered. "I brought her back," Bumpy said. His voice was a rasp, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "I promised. Back for dinner." "You damn fool," Mamie said, tears finally spilling from her eyes. "You stubborn, old, damn fool." She put her arm around his waist, taking his weight. She led him into the bathroom. She sat him down on the closed toilet lid. She began to undress him. She peeled off the ruined jacket. She cut the blood-soaked shirt away with scissors. When she saw the cut on his arm, she hissed. It was deep, needing stitches, but it had stopped bleeding profusely. But when she saw the bruises on his ribs, the purple and black modeling of his skin, she wept silently. She moved efficiently, She got the peroxide. She got the bandages. She cleaned the wound, her hands steady, even as tears dropped onto his skin. Bumpy watched her. He felt the sting of the alcohol, but it felt distant. He felt like he was floating above his own body. "Did you kill them?" Mamie asked quietly, winding the gauze around his bicep. Bumpy looked at the tile floor. He saw a drop of blood there that had fallen from his fingertip. "I left one," Bumpy said. Mamie paused. She looked at him. "Why?" "To tell the others," Bumpy said. "Fear travels faster than bullets, Mamie. If you kill them all, it's a mystery. If you leave one broken man to whisper in the dark, it's a legend." Mamie finished tying the bandage. She got a wet washcloth and began to wipe the blood from his face. She wiped his forehead, his cheeks, his neck. "You're not a legend tonight, Ellsworth," she said softly. "You're a father, and you're a husband, and your heart, I can see it beating through your chest." Bumpy put his hand over hers. "It holds," Bumpy said. "It holds for you." He stood up. He felt cleaner, though the ache was deep in his bones. He walked into the living room. Junebug came out of Elisha's room. "She's asleep," Junebug said. "I gave her something to help. She's safe." Bumpy walked to the balcony door. He slid it open and stepped out into the night air. The city was still noisy. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone was shouting on the street below. But up here, 10 stories high, there was a peace. Bumpy looked at his hands. They were clean now, thanks to Mamie, but he could still feel the vibration of the sword. He could still feel the resistance of flesh and bone. He could still see the light leaving Riker's eyes. He knew what he was. He had never lied to himself about that. He was a violent man in a violent world. He had built a castle on a foundation of bones. He had walked through blood to get to the throne. But tonight, looking at the lights of Harlem, he felt no guilt. He felt no remorse for the men lying on the concrete floor of that garage. He had walked into hell alone. He had looked the devil in the eye, and he had dragged his angel back out. Mamie stepped out onto the balcony behind him. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her head on his back. She could feel the bandages under his fresh shirt. She could feel the slow, heavy thud of his heart. "They laughed at you," Mamie whispered. "That's what Elisha said. They laughed." Bumpy looked out at the moon, hanging high and white over the city. "Yes," Bumpy said, his voice heavy with the weight of the night. "They laughed." He placed his hand over Mamie's hands, holding them tight against his chest. "But they aren't laughing now." The wind picked up, blowing the curtains inside the apartment. Far away, the sound of a police siren grew louder, then faded into the night. Just another noise in the jungle. Bumpy Johnson stood on his balcony, the scarred, tired, dangerous king of Harlem. He was alive. His daughter was safe. And somewhere in the dark, a terrified boy was telling a story that would keep the wolves at bay for a little while longer. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.